Hello and welcome to OPA GCSE Sociology. Today we're going to be looking at what are the consequences of divorce. So just as I do now, really a recap from last lesson, I just want you to answer this question here, this 4-marker. Identify and explain one factor that may have led to an increase in the number of divorces between 1946 and 2017, as shown in item A. So it's a 4-marker. Remember to follow that die approach you can see on the screen. You may have done this in the last lesson. If you have, try and use a different point. So if your main point was relating to sacralisation, maybe look at changes in laws and write an answer for that, or write an answer for the changing status of women, something like that. Okay, so just pause the video, give yourself 5 minutes. Right, so let's jump in. So for the first task, obviously we can't do this in groups, so just think about this with anyone who's at home, or just think about it yourself. Just state which groups, which social stratifications do you think are most likely to get divorced, okay, or be impacted by a divorce? So is there a certain class, ethnicity? Is it a certain age, gender, religion, family type? And why do you think those groups are more likely to get a divorce? So just pause the video, give yourself a couple of minutes, make a few points, and then we'll go over it after. Right, so let's go through that. So you're twice as likely to get divorced in your late 20s than any other age in your life. So essentially, you're more likely to get divorced early, from an early age. Divorce is most common in the initial years of the marriage, or when the children have grown up. So again, 2 points, either early years or maybe immediately after having children, when they're grown up, rather. So in terms of class, you can see that more likely to get a divorce if you are semi-skilled or unskilled worker. So that's essentially those from a lower class, whereas divorce is much lower amongst middle-class parents. Also, childless couples from different classes or religious groups, or religious backgrounds rather, are more likely to get a divorce. So it's saying those without children are more likely to get a divorce. So it might imply that people might stay in marriages for the children. So we've identified a few groups there. Young people more likely to get divorced. Those from lower classes are more likely to get divorced, and those from family types without children. So just a recap on some of those things we've discussed previously about divorce. So divorce has increased overall over the 20th and 21st century. It's tripled since the 1970s, only to decline recently, probably since 2000s, peaking in the 1990s. So in 2017, 1 in 4 households were lone parent families, 9 out of 10 being headed by women. This has also led to an increase in reconstituted families. It's not just the lone parent families that's increased, it's reconstituted. And what I mean by reconstituted, you might know, is blended. So it may be that you have stepbrothers, sisters, mothers, or fathers. And the lesson today is evolving around these 3 categories. So what are the consequences of divorce for the parents, for the children, and then for the extended family? So essentially, over the next couple of slides, just make notes on these 3 categories, and we'll go through it bit by bit. It's pretty self-explanatory. Right, so the first one, how did it impact the father and mother? So Bohannon outlines 6 consequences of divorce on husbands and wives. So maybe get a few of these written down. So there's the emotional impact. So that's having an impact on things like being more likely to have depression or experience loneliness. There's a legal aspect. So having to deal with the courts, custody, which can get messy. Economic impact. So obviously less income brought together because you're not in a partnership. So you're not bringing your finances together anymore. Alimony payments, just the payments in general, legal fees, expensive thing. Co-parental impact, so the sharing of parental responsibilities when it's less clear, especially if you're co-parenting from a distance. So the community impact as well. So Pryor and Trinder talk about this. This idea that it changes this sort of family community. So it might be that friends choose a side, or family members obviously stick with their blood relatives as opposed to their legal, by law, relatives. And then the psychological impacts are similar to the emotional one. So the stress, the chronic depression, and the chronic illnesses that it may cause because of the divorce. So just get a note down of a few of those and pause the video if you need to. So how does divorce impact children? So let's look at a few of those. So Roger and Pryor found that children with separated families had a higher probability of experiencing these various issues. So again, get a few of these down. So being in poor housing or poverty in later life, being poor in adult life or in earlier life rather, exhibiting behavioral problems, and that may link into this idea of performing less well in school, leaving school or home when young. So that may be choosing not to go into higher education, might be exclusions and things like that as well. Becoming sexually active or pregnant from a young age, depressive symptoms, and then consumption of drink, drugs, or smoking. So lots of sort of social issues there, or things that in society are perceived not to be the norm. And then sort of similar again, they followed up and found that divorce did not cause these factors necessarily, but just rather that they're associated, they're correlated. And the issues that we just looked over, so things like the poverty, leaving school early, getting pregnant early, all of those factors are likely to lead to these things in later life. Not guaranteed, just correlated with. So financial hardship, family conflict, parental ability to deal with stress of separation, multiple changes in family structures, quality of contact with non-residential partners not being great. So as the children, we've done the parents as well. So this is the extended family now. So divorce, it's more likely the extended family won't see their relatives as often. So that's really talking about from the other side. So say if, for example, the mum has custody, it might be that you don't see the father's parents, so your grandparents on your father's side as much. On the flip side of that, it might be that just as some members of the family become a bit more distant in terms of extended family, some will become a bit closer as support networks. So it might be, let's use the same example. Let's say just because your father's parents and your grandparents on your father's side are perhaps a bit more distant, it might be that you then see your grandparents on your mother's side a bit more. Generally speaking, there's a need for emotional, maybe financial support. So not all of this is negative. So I think it's really important as well that we get down some of the positives about divorce. So people happily remarry. Many find divorce liberating. So it's all this sense of freedom. Divorce can be amicable, as we talked about before. Sometimes it's just a case of it's over, it's not working anymore, and it's agreed upon. And similar to the liberating element, many households become more positive because of it. It might be that it's this idea of maybe broken relationships, broken families, or dysfunctional families rather, end up getting out of that. Right, so just for the final bit, try and put on a scale what the different theories think about divorce. So let's say on the left-hand side, what you can see is divorce is good. And then on the right-hand side, divorce is bad. Okay, just try and place them there as your own scale. So on the left, divorce is good. On the right, divorce is bad. And give yourself a moment, and I'll feedback just generally. Seeing if you're getting this idea of what theories like diverse family types, which ones don't. Right, so on the far left-hand side for divorce being good, you're really going to have two theories there. It's going to be the postmodernists and the feminists. So the postmodernists just like this idea of choice and diversity. They celebrate diversity, and obviously from divorce, you're more likely to be in a diverse family type. And then feminists, obviously, they like divorce, or the option of divorce rather. They like this idea of choice and not being stuck in potentially patriarchal relationships that are dysfunctional. And you have in the middle the Marxists here. So they talk a little bit about divorce being good or bad. They essentially just say, well, it's good because it means people can get out of relationships where people are venting being victims of capitalism. So dysfunctional relationships indirectly as a result of capitalism. But they're really talking about the reason they're in the middle and not on the good side is because they're not really saying whether it's good or bad. They're just making an observation that maybe people are getting divorced because of capitalism. They're a victim of it. Whereas on the far right, so talking about divorce being a bad thing, you've got two theories really: the functionalist and the new right, two traditionalist theories. So if we remember, we've got people like Parsons and Murdoch who are saying it helps with the function of society. So think that warm bar, think sex role theory. Okay, think about Murdoch's four functions. And you might even go further with that with the new right. So people like Charles Murray saying things like diverse family types, or he associates, whether rightly or wrongly, he associates diverse family types with being dysfunctional, welfare dependent, deviant, and generally a characteristic of the underclass, which is not desirable. Okay, so that concludes this lesson. If you need to, obviously go back and pause the video and revisit some of those ideas.